Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking to several of the CISOs and talking about a whole bunch of security activities. And I'm going to throw it over to Chris. Right now, we're asking the panel members to talk about specific programs. And Chris, once again, you are striped across the various public sectors, have a lot of viewpoints, so you see a lot of different things. Give us an example of a program that's really been successful in helping to harden this ecosystem.
Sure. So a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last year, quite frankly, is a result of what's been happening, not just in public sector, but also in the commercial space around crypto, around ransomware, and the dangers we're being seen to both IT and OT technology. And while there's no specific program in place, the executive order was great. But the funding has literally always been there to a certain extent. So we've had modernization funds available across the federal space for some years now. We've had the data center consolidation program, which allowed us to do all kinds of modernization activities. And what we've been working with, not just our federal customers, but even on our commercial side, we've seen some of the same issues. Colonial Pipeline, yes, that was a high profile, very impactful for the public. But we see that across the board, and that is there's a rudimentary focus now, both from a program funding standpoint, also at the layperson's view, that is, how do I protect my actual data? And one of the things we actually focused on with a lot of organizations, especially in the public sector, was helping to focus on simple things like Active Directory. And I say simple, but very important. And we take that database for granted. And AD is literally a database. And some of the first things that get encrypted or hacked or exfiltrated is the components and the data within Active Directory. So we did work with a lot of agencies to help them understand exactly, look, it's not enough to just copy the Active Directory server to a offsite platform. It's more important now, how do you actually recover? Because a lot of time is spent on backing up, but not a lot of time spent on actual recovery testing and reconstituting your entire network. So we're able to show them using some basic tools that we've had in our portfolio for a number of years to how to protect that Active Directory infrastructure and restore that infrastructure on demand, depending on the severity of the attack. Now, granted, you still need the 3-2-1 approach, 3 copies of your data in 2 locations, for instance, and also 1 offsite in the cloud, and helping them understand exactly the best way to deploy that type of solution. And we found that simple blocking and tackling activity of protecting the Active Directory attack surface, regardless of where your perimeter is, because we all know there's no more perimeter, quite frankly, thanks to COVID, and helping them do that effectively is the number one thing you can do to protect your environments against the threats of ransomware and some of the other things that are coming down the pipe, which, quite frankly, some guy in the bug bounty program for the Army and Air Force right now, they're like, hey, what's the next thing we can basically unleash on the government? So by protecting the infrastructure at its most basic level, we protect it also at the application layer and also the edges of the perimeter for our customers. And we've been very successful doing that.
So important, you bringing up, the pipeline incident and that recovery. Guards, gates, and locks only get us so far, so to speak. Perimeter not being there anymore, but being able to recover from an incident, so important. To have a solid recovery plan when and as needed is certainly very important. General Easley, we talked about critical infrastructure. You've got critical infrastructure in every base across the world, and they're their own cities in their own right. Give us an example of a program that you're working on that you'd like to highlight for the community here.
Great. One of the areas that I'm personally involved in because of its just location in the Army is our Cloud Enterprise Management Office, and the establishment of C-Army, the Army Cloud. So a few years ago, the Army realized that we, again, were fast followers of the Air Force, saw the great work they were doing with Platform One and Cloud One, and said we needed to have this same type of ecosystem to be able to deploy cloud systems for the Army. Again, tied to our financial systems, our identity systems, as well as just data from our critical infrastructure. Again, because the Army is so distributed, we see the cloud as kind of that key enabler to be able, because not only do we have 128 just major active camp posts and stations around the world, we have thousands of small armories and reserve stations all in our 54 territories and states. To manage those thousands of systems is a challenge, and just being able to get that data from those systems instead of using our traditional IT architecture, being able to use a cloud-based architecture is key. as we roll out the Army Cloud, we've realized that we needed, as our sister services did, a DevSecOps pipeline within that cloud environment. And that's where cybersecurity comes in, is how do we do cybersecurity in the cloud, and how do we use cloud native tools to do that? Our identity solutions, our monitoring solutions are all kind of critical things that we're only just getting past our learning phases. How do we upskill our cyber workforce, our cybersecurity centers, to manage those cloud-based infrastructure is an ongoing kind of effort for our team. One way we're doing it, as Wanda talked about, the kind of hack the Air Force and hack the Army efforts, we have a similar effort in our cloud environment called Cloud Thunder, where we're using, kind of first our tabletop exercises, and then next year we'll actually bring in a cyber protection team from Army Cyber Command to help do penetration testing into our cloud environment, just to help defend it better.
Yeah, interesting concept there. This cloud technology really unlocks and unleashes a lot of capability, but it also adds another layer of sophistication. It's not like all the on-prem stuff is gone. So having that capability to sort of stitch that together in these hybrid environments, super important that you're able to lock that down and account for everything, identity management included. Brian, how about at Okta? Speaking of clouds and identity management, et cetera, tell us about a solution that you'd like, a program that you'd like to highlight there, that you'd like to raise awareness to the community.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks, Luke. I was going to kind of bring this back to the zero trust discussion. But then I, kind of took a second thought at that and said, well, no one's really achieved, the touchdown or spiking of the ball of zero trust, right? I don't know that they will ever achieve that, right?
Exactly. Do they ever achieve it, right? Does that go on forever, please?
Yeah. So, I think the biggest success that we're seeing out of that is really that agencies are looking at the systems differently, right? They're just, starting to make moves, putting their security posture as a top priority, and of course in the DoD, I think, security has always been a critical aspect, right? In the Army and the Air Force, the Marines and whatnot, but across the civilian government, agencies as well, you see them making the investments and really raising the priority of those IT initiatives and those investments. I think that's a critical aspect. And just going back to what Major General Easley and Mrs. Jones-Heath were talking about, we're seeing a lot of uptake with the forces, with the Army and the Air Force, are in some of those development shops, right? So in Kessel Run and Kobayashi Maru, in that DevSecOps arena, right? They are starting to embrace and actually have already implemented Okta as their identity and access management into those DevSecOps pipeline, right? And really be able to take advantage of that cloud solution and that security and the speed and agility that gives them and be able to meet their mission. So it's, those are some exciting areas. There's small pockets of, kind of success that we're seeing, but it kind of is the bellwether. You see that sea change happening in the agencies, and I think that's the exciting part to be a part of, and to help help the federal government and these agencies move towards this in their journey of, and being able to combat all the things that Chris talked about, right? The ransomware and all that, just the security vulnerabilities that we're seeing in the threat landscape today.
Those programs very much an early indicator of what you're going to be expecting to see going forward. Well, let's talk about priorities. And since it was cited, both Kessel Run and Kobayashi, I think it was called, and I hadn't heard that one. Wanda, I'm going to bring it back up to you. Let's talk one. Maybe you want to just give a thumbnail of what those two programs are, so the listening audience understands those, since we've referenced it a couple of times. And then talk about what are your top 2 or 3 priorities over the next year.
Okay, so Kessel Run and Space Camp and Bespin and Kobayashi Maru are software factories. Kessel Run was the first one as the model, and basically, cybersecurity was a huge part of this. Number one, you want to certify the process, the pipeline of how you develop and then infuse the security requirements into the testing, so that the product comes out secure. And the second part of that is hardening the infrastructure. As Matt mentioned, we did do pen testing on the infrastructure for Kessel Run and all those software factories, as well as Cloud One and Platform One. So we are infusing that type of approach across all of those efforts. Some priorities, the main thing is to support the CSAP's vision of accelerate, change, and lose. And we're doing that. From hardening our infrastructures, whether it be network or software factory, as I mentioned, bringing more emphasis on our operational technology and trying to balance new development, but also protecting our legacy assets. Migration to the cloud continues to be a huge priority, as Matt mentioned as well, within the Army. So there's a lot going on, and I can go on for hours talking about all of the great efforts. Talent management certainly is a key piece of what I want to focus on, in the next couple of months, because we know that in order to continue to grow and mature, you have to have the right talent. And it's many skill sets that we require, from architecture to cybersecurity SMEs to data officers, AI, ML. We need all of those type of skill sets to ensure that the Air Force is able to change and accelerate, or we will certainly be continuing to have challenges as we prepare to protect our assets.
Interesting to hear that, and great to hear that you're embedding that security capability into those software factories. And as I understand it, it's actually you actually have airmen and women that are actually participating, and are actually the employees that are doing those software factories, which I think is fantastic to see that. So great progress in that area. Chris, let's talk about at Quest the priorities that you're seeing over the next year or so. Give us the top two. What's the demand signal? What are you focusing on these days?
I'll tell you one thing I'm doing. I'm going back to Dev and telling him, you got to find cooler code names. Okay. I mean, Kobayashi Maru. I'm like,
anyway. I applaud the Air Force for allowing him to use those code names.
Hey, well, you know what? I think one of the luxuries, when you're called Guardians and you literally control satellites with lasers, I think you can use whatever name you want.
Sure.
I think the important thing we lose track of sometimes is that as we look to the future, and Wanda says something that we kind of glossed over, and as AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or what I was taught, algorithmic intelligence, because we still are not really at artificial intelligence, quite frankly. But a lot of what we do in that space is highly dependent on the quality of data we put into that information pipeline. And I remember watching a movie once, and someone said they're about to do something very significant. They said, confidence is high. To get to a high level of confidence around the result set that comes out of what I call the black box of machine learning is that you have to be really confident that the data that went in was exactly what you expected it to be. And I think that's a discussion that's going on across the entire landscape of machine learning and artificial intelligence. That is, what is the quality of data? What data sets are we talking about? How did we vet that data, for instance? How did we identify that data? So one of the things we're looking at over the next 1 to 2 years is, and we've made significant investments in acquisitions to understand exactly, one, how do we now tag and identify all the metadata, for instance, and all the data that supports that metadata within an organization. Simple activities like identifying, well, where's the PII data, for instance, across the environments? We all know about the losses we've had at certain agencies where we've lost control of very important data sets, for instance, around security credentials and things like that. So now, how do you now identify where all the data is in an organization, catalog it, so if you are attacked, you know exactly what your losses are. I think when we're attacked sometimes, it's easy to quantify things in economic terms, but in the software world, for instance, well, if you lost all my PII data, what is the risk to me as a citizen? What is the risk to an agency, for instance? So understanding where all that data is, being able to tag it, catalog it, for instance, and when he hands it off to a special ops program that's doing DevSecOps, for instance, they understand exactly where that data is coming from, what security needs to be attached to that particular data set, for instance, and if that system is attacked, whether it's the application or the underlying databases, for instance, we understand exactly what the losses are, and we can mitigate those losses because we've identified that information. So that's just a piece of what we're looking at, aside from the other things in cyber, for instance, but we all understand that data is a critical component, and we aim to protect that data too as well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the bad actors aren't getting in there to see how cool your network is set up. They're getting in there to get to the data, right? That's the bottom line. Jim, how about at Fortinet? What are your top 2 priorities there for the next year and change?
So, Luke, I think everyone on this panel would agree that cybersecurity is never going to be perfect. We're never going to attain that state of perfect protection. So the big priority in working with our federal partners is now increasingly on response. It's saying we've got to recognize we're going to get hit. So in deference to the fact that we've got 2 armed services on here, the response needs to be both tactical, operational, and strategic. I need to be able to automate what happens when the device itself gets hit. I need to be able to automate. I need to have playbooks of how the people in the security operations center are going to respond. And then to elevate it strategically, I need to figure out how to federate that. And to build on what Chris said, to do that kind of automation and integration, there's a technology piece that is heavily dependent on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'll be a little bit contrarian. I think differentially, we have gotten better at doing that. In certain parts of it, like sandboxing technology to discover malicious activity, we've gotten pretty good. I mean, look at a company like Fortinet. We see 100 billion pieces of data a day. We use all 3 modes of AI on it, the structured, the unstructured, go figure out what you're doing, and then the reinforcement learning. So it's gotten pretty good, but finding things in a minute or 2 is no longer good enough when you're talking about ransomware, something that gets in, moves laterally, starts encrypting right away. You need the ability tactically to say, I can give you behavioral analytics at the endpoint that are sophisticated enough to say, whoa, this doesn't match a signature, but this is something that looks like ransomware. It's behaving, it's doing something that is characteristic of something that I want to stop in real time. And then figuring out how to offload the fact that our analysts in the SOC are drowning in data. I mean, we're really problem and solution focused people in this field. The problem is that means for our enterprises, we've got 30 to 80 cybersecurity solutions that the poor SOC analyst is trying to manage. You need to offload that. And the technology has gotten good enough with AI and ML to do the grunt work, to automate the simple stuff and let our humans focus on the things that really require their skill and judgment. So really, Luke, it's about enabling better response, both tactically all the way up to strategically, and saying shared situational awareness and the ability to automate as much of the ability to respond when something bad is happening in real time as we can.
Really getting some of those sophisticated tools in place. And as somebody had mentioned one time, taking the robot out of the human and allowing them to do some of that higher value, higher order type of analysis, super important. We're going to take another short break here, and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.